This is the lecture for European history for Friday, the 28th of January, 2022. A specter is haunting Europe. The specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Where is the opposition that has not hurled back the branding or reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its reactionary adversaries? Two things result from this fact. One, communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. Two, it is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in the English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. There's a specter haunting Europe, the specter of communism. This is the preamble to the Communist Manifesto, first published in the revolutionary year of 1848. So, what we're going to do is we are going to look at this year and the context of communism's birth. Apparently I messed up my own writing here. Okay, so the Concert of Europe, the system Metternich sets up at the Congress of Vienna, lasts a solid 33 years outside of France. France, being France, had a revolution in the 1820s and violence in the 1830s, but it was very clear that what was going on in France would not be allowed to reach the crescendo of doom that had happened in 1789, 90, 91, 92, 93. In fact, everyone was openly, absolutely clear that this was a local phenomenon about French government itself. So, outside of France, the Concert of Europe functions for a solid 33 years. And during those 33 years, the great powers of Europe are able to help one another prevent revolution. Now, in fact, one could argue, I hate this. There we go. Hold on. What did I do? Maybe it was my gaming club. That's possible.
What did you guys do?
Oh, we had picture. That's what happened. We had picture yesterday after school, and people were lined up against the board, so they brushed it. Well, that explains it, because I really don't remember rubbing my belly or my back against the board last night to distort so much of it. In fact, the Concert of Europe system had its goal of preventing another general war. There isn't another general war for 99 years. So, arguably, Metternich's system is in place, it shouldn't be 100, not just for 33 years in terms of the details of the Concert of Europe, but in terms of effectively keeping the peace, it succeeds for about a century. It isn't until 1914 that another general war erupts. So, Metternich's system may have been reactionary, It may have been un-liberty oriented. It may have been something radicals hated and communists hated and everyone who wanted reform hated. But it worked. It worked. It worked to keep the peace. That is something that needs to be understood. 33 years of peace in a European context is a lot. And 99 years without a general war is even more. However, during this time of political stability or reaction, and reaction is a term for European conservatives. Reaction is a pejorative term. It's a term of insult. European conservatives are monarchists and papists. Reaction is described as these people have no ideas of their own. They simply react against all forms of change. Don't listen to reactionaries because they're deadheads, dullards, traditionalists so mired in the past they can't imagine anything new ever coming along that was good. Which is a calumny. It's not exactly true. But European conservatives of this period, who are called reactionaries and who themselves adopt the term a little bit, are in fact papists and monarchists. They believe that the Pope and the kings should have authority like they did back in the olden days of the Middle Ages. But this political instability comes hand in glove with the Industrial Revolution, at least in Britain and later in France and Belgium and Germany. And so you have a system of political stability like the surface layer of cream on milk before it's homogenized. Underneath is the radical changes to lifestyle that the Industrial Revolution is bringing. And such radical changes to lifestyle are of course going to have a political effect. So in 1848, and I almost always call it the revolutionary year of 1848, the tea kettle starts singing. The pot starts boiling over. No, I'm not going to blurble out a bunch of water to demonstrate that.
I got excited.
That would be wrong. Sorry. Don't mean to disappoint. So, throughout Europe, revolutions pop off all over the place in 1848. Why? Because as individual as we are, human beings are also herd animals. And this is why when we saw that video about courage being contagious, it's absolutely true. Yawns are contagious too. Don't do it. If you start yawning in front of somebody, you will provoke yawns in other people. And so don't do it. Grab a marker and your quiz. So that is something that's true also with panic. I have seen people panic. It's not pretty when people panic. Panicky people, never mind. I was about to go into something that really would have been sort of sad and ugly.
Oh, come on.
Here we are. Makes me happy and pretty, I guess. There we go.
What?
Just put them both on my desk when you're done saying. Okay.
Oh, what were you going to say?
So, throughout Europe, the smell of revolution is in the air. And people catch the smell, and they do things that in normal times they wouldn't do. I don't know. It's almost as if you have a region of the country that has a political slant so strong in one direction that they elect a district attorney that publicly says, I'm not going to enforce most of the laws because most of the laws put too many black men in prison. So we're not going to enforce property theft unless it's of a certain amount or more. And we're not even going to call assault a major crime anymore. People will commit it and the police will catch them, but it's my office's job to prosecute. And I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And instead of people going, Oh, anarchy is here. There is no more oppressiveness of the police. We've defunded or defanged the police, and we can just relax and be nice to one another now. Instead of that, for some reason, crime goes whoop,
I wonder why.
including assaults, thefts, armed robbery, and murder, including the killing of police officers.
That's kind of
It's almost like one thing leads to the other. But no. Because they mean well.
wait.
I'm so bad. What's the other side? No, you can figure out the other side. The other side is, but if we stop persecuting criminals, they're not going to feel persecuted and they won't feel a need to react anymore. This is the comic book theory of crime. The comic book theory of crime, I learned this by reading comic books back in the 80s, was that Batman caused the existence of the Joker. Because the masked vigilante provoked in the Joker a psychological response of, no, you don't. You're not going to be the only costumed madman running around. And since you're for law and order, I'm going to be for chaos and disorder. And that Superman creates Lex Luthor. That the police create crime. And there are whole schools of psychological thought in colleges and universities that argue this. Because they have private security. They argue this. They say that police create crime. And if you get rid of the government or police, this is an anarchist position, you end up with a world that becomes closer to the communist utopia.
Well, I don't think that's how
In any event, revolution is in the air. And people are doing things in Europe in 1848 that aren't normal. Connor.
So a couple months ago, Minneapolis just blinked their police department out of existence.
Yep.
Then they had a record spike in crime. And the city council was like, I wonder why that happened. And suddenly they want a police department back.
Yeah. What's funny is that a lot of people who used to work for the Minneapolis police don't want to go work there anymore.
Yeah.
Because there are other places that will appreciate them.
Did you hear what also happened in Atlanta?
I may have, but go ahead and say
Pretty
it.
much the entire police department just walked off the job one day. Except for like a handful of guys.
Good. Look, I come from a family of police and teachers. I can tell you what it's like to live every day with the possibility that your mom may not come home because she might get killed in the line of duty or maimed in the line of duty. That's not nothing. If you come from a military family, you know that. If you come from a family where anyone does a dangerous job, you live with that. That's just part of normal life. But at the very least, what we got in my day was that people respected police. Yeah, there were some corrupt bozos, but in general terms, the police force and the policing vocation was something that was respected. Why? Because without police, you're on your own. It's the Wild West. And not everyone is Wyatt Earp or Jesse James. There are a lot of people out there that are more like Elmer Fudd or, you need the police to have civil life. Yes.
A lot of people are just walking off the job at Kootenai because since they are requiring vaccinations and but it's not even just people that are unvaccinated, it's people that are vaccinated but don't agree with the fact that they're requiring it, and so
that's how I feel. And I'm vaccinated.
A ton of most of their staff are
good.
leaving.
No, look, the state of New York, state Supreme Court, last week ruled that statewide mandates for masks and vaccinations are unconstitutional and wrong and would no longer be done in the state of New York. The new governor of New York said, don't listen to the Supreme Court of the state. We're still going to enforce things. So a bunch of students show up at a Nassau County high school in Long Island, which is near New York City, without masks against school policy. And they say, well, the Supreme Court said that we don't have to. It's unconstitutional. The school said, well, the governor said, we're going to ignore the court. We're still going to maintain the mandate. But because of the unclear legal situation, we're going to put anyone who refuses to wear a mask in the library. And that's where you're going to spend your day. Or you can go home. So parents are protesting and going in and making a fuss because schools are enforcing a governor's order that the courts have said is unconstitutional. Now, this is what's called a constitutional crisis. In the state of New York, the governor and the legislature and the judiciary you remember this from civics, are supposed to work together harmoniously. The legislature makes the laws, the executive enforces the laws, the judiciary interprets the laws. Well, the judiciary has just legitimately said this is an illegitimate law, you can't enforce it. To which the governor said, in effect, forget it, we're still going to enforce it. So this is a constitutional crisis. The branches of government, instead of working with one another, are working against. So we live in crazy town. We live on clown world. I got to be quick. So if you have something else, make it.
Yeah, talking about New York and the vaccine mandates. I think it was like a month or two ago where like they basically said if you're not vaccinated as a medical professional, that you're getting kicked out basically. So they brought in a whole bunch of National Guard guys, like medics and stuff that are medics, and they're EMT, like they're certified, but they're trauma medics.
Not
but like
civilian
with viruses or disease often.
It's kind of different treating battlefield wounds as opposed to dealing with a civilian population and virus. Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, that's also kind of just like the whole Army's medical philosophy is way. If you're a combat medic, you only treat combat stuff. Yeah,
because that's what you're there for. Never mind. I could go on, and obviously, if people want, fair is fair. If you are of the other point of view, I didn't really intend to go this far into this discussion. This is called a swerve. If somebody wishes to argue the other point of view, I will not only encourage it, I will try my best to honor it by giving you the floor for enough time to make a real point. Does anyone wish to do that? No, I will not interpret the silence as an admission that my point of view happens to be right. That is certainly not the case. People may just not feel like coming forward and arguing the other side, which is, my God, there's a pandemic. Oh!
I'll argue it.
Thank you.
So, it's irresponsible of people to, like we were talking about how people who are vaccinated walking off the job is a way of protesting. It is irresponsible for them to do that because they're qualified for the job, and it should be their moral obligation to stay and work and treat people and do their job.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question. You can respond. I'm doing it because you, I think, are not going to interpret my question as an attempt to make you feel stupid or wrong or anything. I don't think you'll feel that way. The excuse that a lot of people used in World War II when they committed war crimes and crimes against humanity was I was just following orders. Since World War II, in the West anyway, United States, Europe, elsewhere, the concept that a person has a moral obligation to disobey an illegitimate order, an immoral order, has been increasingly used. So that if people are given an order that they consider violates their conscience, what they should do is resign. That is a context.
Oh no, I agree.
Okay, but what do you wish to answer that from the devil's advocate point of view?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think that if somebody, if them walking off the job meant that somebody, it meant, for instance, like if people walked out of a hospital like that and somebody ended up dying as a result of it, would they be able to live with that?
Yeah, okay, that's a very good point. Trust me, by the way, this is why we don't usually let police strike. You get the blue flu, which is an unofficial police strike, where everyone just calls in sick. That's from the 70s, because in the 70s we experimented with everything we're doing now has been done before. Not necessarily for a pandemic, but various government policies and mandates. And what happened was, instead of the police going on strike, which they're legally forbidden to do, you just have 95% of the police department call in sick. It's called the blue flu. And yeah, people were victimized because there were no police present. There was no police presence on the street. That is a valid point. One could argue, and then I'm going to move on, that in this case the needs of the many do outweigh the needs of the few, and that the duty of a medical doctor to perform service in the midst of a pandemic or of a nurse, or of any kind of EMT or whatever, their duty to society should outweigh their own personal scruples. That's an argument that a communitarian would make. Not a communist, a communitarian. Fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Nobody else wishes to argue? Really?
I have one fact.
Please.
Actually, the death rates went down when medical professionals went on strike due to the fact that they weren't actually performing non-official, like, emergency surgeries. So, like, if somebody was getting, like, a cosmetic surgery, then the death rate, they wouldn't perform the surgery. And the Hippocratic Oath and their ethic and moral code is definitely something that corresponds. So some medical professionals would go on leave, but they would actually return for, like, important surgeries.
That's really ethical. That's scrupulous. That's like somebody who opposes a war, but allows himself to be drafted and becomes a battlefield medic. I can't say anything against that. That's amazing. If you know anyone who's done this, good for them. So they walk out and they don't do anything discretionary. But if there's a life-threatening thing that's their expertise, then they'll go in and help. That's great. I did not know people were doing it. Thank you.
It was like a study in several countries, like Israel, Britain, like all over the world.
Cool. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay. So, in France, there's another revolution, which is going to be a step towards what will become a second empire under Napoleon III, Napoleon Bonaparte's grandnephew. In Hungary, which is part of the Austrian Empire, there's a strong nationalist movement. So the Hungarians rise up and drive out the Austrians. But this is the case where the Emperor Nicholas I, Tsar and autocrat of all the Russias, helps out his Austrian fellow emperor and marches the Russian army into Hungary, bashes heads until the Hungarians stop rebelling, and then retreats just as quickly as the Austrian army can move back in. So the Hungarian Revolution is put down by Russian troops. But the Emperor of Austria realizes that something needs to be done. So from this time, the Kaiser Franz Joseph, the Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, who's going to be alive from before 1848, who's going to be ruling Austria from before 1848 until the middle of World War I, incredibly long-lived guy. He's going to create what's called the Dual Monarchy. So the symbol of Russia has often been a double-headed eagle, facing east, facing west. The Austrians developed their own double-headed eagle, representing the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. The dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary gives the Hungarians home rule within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Emperor of Austria is also the King of Hungary. That's the unity. But the Hungarians make their own domestic policy, their own laws, taxation, things like that. The Austro-Hungarian military is unified. Their foreign policy is unified. But the government of Austria no longer is going to manage the people of Hungary. This is going to set the stage for a lot of other nationalities within the polyglot empire of Austria-Hungary to try to get their own variant of home rule, which the emperor is going to resist. But this is a result of 1848. The Austrian Empire is replaced by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A unitary monarchy is replaced by a dual monarchy, two-headed eagle. In Germany, something interesting happens. Now remember, Karl Marx is a German, and he has to flee Saxony. He's born in Chemnitz, which during communist times was called Karl-Marx-Stadt, Karl Marx Place, Karl Marx City. And he ends up having to flee to London because he's considered to be a dangerous revolutionary insurrectionist radical. And he does most of his work in London. Man never works a day in his life. He's supported constantly by wealthy people who think his ideas are good. But in Germany in 1848, the medieval capital of the old Hohenstaufen monarchy, the old Holy Roman Empire, when it was primarily a German empire. Frankfurt becomes the center of what is called the Frankfurt Diet. No, it is, I have to say this, it is not about eating hot dogs to lose weight. The Frankfurt Diet is a congress from all the regions of Germany where elected people and appointed people go, and they are going to try to establish a unified Germany under a constitutional monarchy. Now, Germany is not a country. Germany is a cultural region, like Greece was a cultural region before the Persian Wars. But Germany has dozens and dozens of states. In fact, when Napoleon invades Germany, Germany had over 100 states. And he reduces that to a few dozen. And after Napoleon's defeat, the Germans don't go back to having over 100 states. They retain their more efficient Napoleonic borders, with a few exceptions. So the people of Germany, should I say the middle class of Germany, what Karl Marx would call the bourgeoisie of Germany, or the Bürgerlich of Germany, the townsmen, the professionals, they come together and they are desperately trying to make a new unified Germany. We'll get rid of Saxony, we'll get rid of Prussia, we'll get rid of Bavaria and Baden and Württemberg and Hesse and all of these places, and we will replace them with a unified constitutional monarchy, a liberal Germany. Not liberal in the modern American sense, but liberal in the sense of the United States, liberal in the sense of liberty-oriented, right? The problem is they can't do a straight republic. The world isn't ready for it. So they've got to have a royal family sign on. They can't choose the royal family of Austria. The Habsburgs are hyper-conservatives. Their Catholicism will turn off the North Germans. And in general, the Austrians are more concerned with the many people they rule in Southeastern Europe. The Hungarians, the Czechs, the Croats, the Slovenes, the Serbs, and the Romanians, and so on. So the Habsburgs, which is the most prominent royal family in Germany, is out. Well, the second most prominent royal family in Germany is the Hohenzollerns. The Hohenzollerns ruled Prussia. You know, Prussia, the modern Sparta, the military state with the goose-stepping soldiers. Prussia, who with England helped win the Battle of Waterloo. Now, the Prussians at this point are ruled by King Frederick William. And Friedrich Wilhelm receives a delegation from the Frankfurt Diet, where they beg him to become King of Germany, or Emperor of Germany. He looks at them, lawyers, thinks about it for a moment. I will not accept a crown from the gutter, and leaves. Doors shut. It's over. Without a royal family of the stature of the Hohenzollerns taking over, accepting the constitutional limited powers of a constitutional monarch, the Frankfurt Diet is doomed to fail. And the King of Prussia has just very insultingly told the Frankfurt Diet that they are of the gutter. I will not accept a crown from the gutter. So the revolution in Germany fizzles and falls apart. Frankfurt Diet collapses, and it's back to normal things until Otto von Bismarck comes along 15 years later and starts unifying Germany, not through constitutionalism, but by force under Prussia. So throughout Europe, there are all these different revolutions, and it's in the midst of this that Karl Marx decides that he needs to introduce communism onto the big stage. And he writes the Manifesto. Now, a lot of people assume that the Communist Manifesto is actually the blueprint for communism. It's not. It's sort of an introductory pamphlet, which goes over, in very broad strokes, certain ideas of communism. Excuse me. But it's an overview. Communism is really going to be described later in a book called Das Kapital, which means the money. And it's like this thing. It's the Bible of communism. It's really, really dense. But let's talk about Marx himself. Marx is from Saxony, from Chemnitz. Marx has Jewish ancestry as well as German heritage. And Marx is... No, I'm going to need that later. Marx is radicalized from a young age. He's a thinker. Undeniably, he is one of the most influential thinkers in human history. Marx and his religion, he won't call it that, his ideology, but it is a religion. Marx is as influential in his own way as Mani, as Zoroaster, as Moses, as Jesus, as Muhammad, as the Buddha, as Confucius. Because Marx establishes a set of ideas that is going to become one of the world's dominant religions for a while. And it still is a powerful force in the world today. Again, he would never call it a religion. He would call it a political philosophy or an ideology. But it has all the earmarks of all the characteristics of a religion. Okay, image. Large. Okay. So let's take a look. That's an actor. Let's take a look at Mr. Marx, who is not one of the Marx brothers. So, I've heard it's because of the wild beard, but no, we do not look the same. Can you shut the right light switch off, please?
Wait, can you try that one more time? Just go up next to it.
You should need to grow out the side.
Yeah, you gotta go to the side.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that, though. I'm not. So, Marx starts out, he's a radical, he writes, he thinks, and he eventually has to flee the mainland of Europe because he is not going to remain a free man. If the police get a hold of him in almost any of the countries where he tries to radicalize and spread revolution, they're going to put him in a cell somewhere, they may torture him, he may die. So he flees to Britain, to London, where he's going to spend most of the rest of his life. And what he does there is he becomes basically a daily caller at a local library. And in this library, Marx is going to do the independent research necessary to formulate communism. And the fruits of that labor, this is long after the Communist Manifesto, is the book Das Kapital. And I'll be explaining the various aspects of Das Kapital and Marxian theory very soon. But before I do that, I need to tell you how Marx is able to do this, because earning a living, really usually occupies the time of most people. Okay, this is Friedrich Engels.
Oh, wait, now stand next to me.
No. Yes, so does Marx. Engels is Marx's partner. Engels is going to get co-authorship credit for Das Kapital. In fact, Marx and Engels is almost like pork and beans. It's something that a lot of communists just get used to saying. Marx and Engels, pork and beans. They like pork and beans. Friedrich Engels owns factories. He's a factory owner. And Friedrich Engels takes some of his profits from the factories he owns to pay for Karl Marx to write about how factory ownership is one of the world's great evils and needs to be stopped.
Wait, what?
So, Marx, who's against the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, the owning class, is personally and directly supported by his partner, who happens to be a capitalist factory owner of the ownership class.
That makes sense.
That's almost as ironic. No, that's more ironic. I had a former student who went with her dad to do a tour of Europe just before she graduated from high school. So during April break, they toured around, and they went to Karl Marx's birthplace, the birthplace of the man who is against capitalism and commerce and all sorts of things like that. And she bought me a refrigerator magnet and a Karl Marx chocolate bar in the gift shop. The gift shop! Now, if you don't understand how that is a violation of Marx, that's like having a Satan salon at Bethlehem. Okay, it's just it's really not in keeping with Marx's ideas. The gift shop. I still have somewhere the wrapper of that candy bar, and I laminated it because I like the idea so much. My brother-in-law, who volunteered for service in Vietnam, he got injured before he could go, but he volunteered, who was a patriot and a published author and also a history teacher. When he visited London, he had promised that he would fill a water pistol with something sort of icky that's liquid that comes out of the human body, and go to Karl Marx's birthplace or grave and spray his grave. Now, he didn't do that. In the end, he didn't want the hassle of getting arrested by the British for desecrating the grave of Karl Marx. But he came this close. Are you saying that it's a good idea to desecrate the graves of those who you disagree with? Marx is kind of a special case, I think. But what do I know? In any event, Marx doesn't ever work a day in his life. He writes and he thinks, and he's supported by the very kind of person that he says is the enemy. But hey, Descartes was a lousy human being also, and he did great science and even some pretty interesting philosophy. Lights, please. Turn them up, if you would. Thank you. Okay, what are some of Marx's ideas? First of all, Marx is going to influence the most important ism of the Bohemian Intelligentsia. Okay, what's an ism? Well, there's all sorts of belief systems. Yeah?
Something that ends in ISMS.
Yes. It is a belief system.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got to do it. I can't believe it, but I've got to do it. I just thought of a way of expressing what isms are using an 80s African-American rock, heavy metal rock band called Living Colour. So we're going to listen to a song of theirs about ism. Yeah. The thing I love about 80s music videos is there's nothing cheesy or overstated at all. Everything is sort of subtle and in proportion. You know, like the guy walking around with a bomb who decides he's going to, slam it into the ground. That's not an overstated point. No, that's rapier wit, indirect, sort of almost a Keynesian in its social commentary. In any event, I thought it would be a good idea to play that for you.
Great idea.
It tells you my judgment. Isms are ideologies, and so many of them follow or have the word, have the suffix ism on them. Now, what is the Bohemian Intelligentsia? Well, when I was in college in the 80s, Bohemians were what we called the hippies of the 80s. Now, by the time of the 1980s, the hippies had become sort of this ritualized thing, and they were called bohos, or bohemians. They were all individuals, so you could tell them from halfway across campus because they dressed exactly the same. They were such individuals. They all wore tie-dye t-shirts, patched jeans. They all smoked clove cigarettes. and loved reggae music. All of them. Absolutely. Individuals. The avant-garde. Obviously, I'm trying to make a slight point here. Bohemianism is an old-fashioned European term for people who are cutting-edge thinkers. They don't live a normal mainstream lifestyle. They live a bohemian lifestyle. They don't live out in the country or in small towns. They live in like the Greenwich Village city centers. They live in artist communities within big cities. They're not defined by their jobs, man. They're defined by their art and their literature and the fact that they stay up all night drinking coffee in coffee shops talking about the nature of life and the universe and everything. It's fun to be a bohemian if you can afford to be for a little while. It's an interesting way of spending a few years. But there are a few people who make a lifestyle out of it. And again, somehow they can afford to do this. So, please wait. The Bohemian Intelligentsia. Intelligentsia is another European term for those people who are defined by their focus on ideas. So the various isms of the Bohemian Intelligentsia basically means the cutting-edge ideas of the leading thinkers of their time. And they come up with a variety of isms, and they come up with great depth for Marxism, communism, socialism, and so forth. So we, next week, are going to go through Marx's ideas in Das Kapital and some of the various other isms of the Bohemian Intelligentsia. Questions, comments, thoughts? Haley?
Were you a Bohemian?
No.
Oh. You said it would be
I didn't have the money to be, and I've also always been a conservative. I had some boho friends. They were sort of embarrassed to be friendly to me in front of their other boho friends because I was a well-known conservative on campus. But in those days, liberals had the courage to actually talk to people who disagreed with them as college students.
That was really good.
It was long ago. Yeah.
Long ago.
Okay, remember you have
Chapter
survey 21 due Monday. Adios. You can talk quietly among yourselves until dismissal.